So it's now 1965. The Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, has been passed, and big push is on to register voters in the South. A big push was on in the city of Selma, Alabama, because that county had been notorious for not registering black voters. So they'd had many demonstrations in Selma, but they decided they were going to march from Selma to Montgomery and up Dexter Avenue to the top of Dexter Avenue to the state capitol to demand that they be allowed to register to vote. The first attempt was made on March the 7th, 1965. 600 people started across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and they were met by armed men on horseback with clubs. These were sheriff's officers, um, I imagine state troopers, Klansmen, militiamen who waded into this group and just wailed away at them with anything they had in their hands. This is where John Lewis, the civil rights activist, got a skull fracture. Many other people were seriously injured during this time, and it became known as Bloody Sunday. A few days later, Dr. King wanted to march again, but there was an order issued by a court saying no more marches for now. And so he waited, and finally, on March the 21st, the march was approved, and they were protected by federalized National Guardsmen. That is, the Alabama National Guard was taken over by the federal government and charged with protecting these marchers as they moved from Selma to Montgomery. The governor of Alabama refused to do that, and that was George Wallace, and we'll talk about him more in another video. So they marched the 50 miles from Selma to Montgomery. It took about 3 or 4 days. And by the time they reached Montgomery, the crowd had gotten so large that it was a throng. And I sat with my mother watching this because she grew up in Montgomery, and she talked about walking down Dexter Avenue and having white people block the sidewalk by standing 6 and 7 across and not allowing her to pass. And she would have to go down into the street to go around them. And for her to see this was a revelation. There were many, many famous people who were marching there, and one of them was Michael Landon, who starred on Little House on the Prairie and Highway to Heaven. But his very first TV appearance was on a show called Bonanza, where he played Little Joe Cartwright. And my mother loved Bonanza, and Little Joe was her favorite character. So when she saw that Little Joe Cartwright was even marching, she was moved and she wept. And she said, looking at that crowd, moving up Dexter Avenue, crowds filled with men, women, people from every race,